Welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I founded an eco-conscious pottery company called Oxford Clay. Now, I don't just make pottery, I make resources such as books and courses for other potters who want to be more eco-conscious in their pottery practice. And that's what this podcast is all about. It's about me sharing everything I've learned with you, and I can't wait to get started. Let's go! Hello, so before we get on with the episode, I wanted to tell you about two completely free guides that I've made just for you about pottery. And the first guide is called How to Make a Pottery Glaze. So if you've ever been curious about how to make your own pottery glaze, this guide will show you exactly how to make your own glaze from start to finish. It tells you all the ingredients you need. It tells you step by step how to make the glaze, how to stay safe when glaze making, and it's got a stoneware glaze recipe in there. And if you've been curious about how to fire pottery, I have also made a guide on electric kiln firing. So this guide will tell you all the different terms that's used in like kiln firing, and what they mean, and it also takes you through the exact firing schedule that I use to do my bisque firing and also stoneware glaze firing. So it's got all the temperatures in there, all the timings in there, and both of these guides are available from the Oxford Clay website at www.oxfordclay.co.uk/resources for potters. Okay, let's get on with the episode. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. It's so nice to be here with you. Like I always say, I love talking to you about pottery, and yeah, I'm really excited as well to tell you about more about making your own glaze in this episode. So you might have never made a glaze before. Or you might have tried to make a glaze and you thought, oh, maybe I want to try something different. I want to maybe make my own unique glaze. So that's what this episode is all about. It's really about 3 ways to make a totally unique pottery glaze. Because quite often in pottery, there's various combinations of stuff you can try. So you can kind of use a base thing, kind of recipe or way of doing something, a bit like if you're learning to make a pot on the wheel, there's kind of, standard things that they're just you could, first of all, you have to center it, then you bring the pot up, then you shape the pot, and then you turn the base or something. So there's kind of a distinct sort of way of doing things, but then within that you can get your own style, your own technique, especially with glazes, you can create your own aesthetic. So creating a unique pottery glaze is something that is really a really cool idea. If you think I want to make my pottery really, a certain style, a certain color, a certain texture, there's ways of making your very own glaze, that someone may have never made before. So there's 3 really, really easy ways of doing it. Okay, so we're going to talk about those on today's episode. Okay, so the first thing to say is that it's a really good idea to start with an actual recipe, a base recipe. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because these are tried and tested recipes. So if you're thinking, I don't know where to find a recipe, there's a brilliant website called Glazing.org where potters upload pictures of the recipes they've made, and often the recipes are very kind of accessible, simple recipes. The recipe actually that I use all the time, I actually saw on Glazing initially. So it's a brilliant resource for potters to share recipes with each other and for you to get recipes for free. Another way is that you can actually like get, you know, pottery books, or you know, I've seen some kind of recipes in like, you know, when you do a Google search for like a journal article or something, there are, you know, recipes maybe from, say, like magazines, ceramic magazines that might be like made into PDFs and put on the internet, or you know, books that you can get out of the library, or some ebooks you can sometimes just, you know, read as well, like that open access. So there's, you know, loads and loads of sources of pottery recipes, like for you to kind of base your glaze on. So the reason it's really good to use a pottery glaze recipe is that you know it works, right? So it'll have the right balance of different rocks in to kind of give the sort of texture that you want. And it, you know, it's been tested for, like, we don't want it to run too much, we want it to be, I don't know, to behave in a certain way, we want it to be a certain like level of shininess. So it's really, really good to get a recipe first, right? And then you can sort of go from there in terms of making your unique glaze. Okay, so what are the different ways of making a glaze which is totally unique to you? Okay, so the first way of doing it is to switch out certain ingredients in a glaze recipe that you've got already. So let's, for example, take something where, you know, if a glaze recipe has talc in it, for example. So talc you can switch out for dolomite. Okay, so you could switch talc out for dolomite, and you could see the effect on the glaze then. Okay, another thing you can do is switch out china clay for ball clay, right, and see what kind of effect that has on your glaze. So for example, if a glaze calls for like I don't know, say like 10% china clay, you could try switching that out for like a ball clay which is like high in iron, naturally high in iron, and that will add colour to your glaze. So you can, say for example, switch out china clay for high mod ball clay, which is a ball clay from southwest England, which is naturally has lots of iron in it, and when you fire that, it makes a very light green glaze. It makes this beautiful light green glaze that is just from the naturally occurring iron in that ball clay. So you can make, you know, it's really cool. You can make, you know, colour using just the rocks that you're making the glaze from. So yes, okay, so that's okay. I was just reading, I've made a note about tin, and you can actually, yeah, so if a glaze, so the reason that tin is used in glazes is usually to make the glaze more opaque, and also, you know, like lots of white glazes are made from tin. Tin oxide kind of goes, you know, it makes like a white, very white glazes. So, you know, if you want to use something else, not tin, you can try using dolomite and whiting in glazes, and that will, or china clay even, and that will, yeah, so dolomite, whiting or china clay, and that, you know, again, you can get this similar kind of whitening effect with those rocks rather than adding a tin oxide on top. So yeah, that's what you can do. That's my first tip in terms of like 3 ways to make a totally unique pottery glaze. Try switching out ingredients. And if you don't want to switch out like a hot, you know, you know, sort of like say like, for example, something already has, I don't know, 20% quartz or something, you don't want to necessarily switch out, you know, all of that for like ball clay, but you could try adding, you know, you could try switching out, maybe you could take the quartz down to like 15 and you could put in like maybe 5 of ball clay and see if that like affects the color. So, you know, you can always play around with like these kind of these amounts, but it's quite a good idea not to like totally mess with amounts, because usually, you know, if a glaze is based on like a feldspar or like a Cornish stone, so for example, the glaze that I use on all my pottery, it's 20% quartz and it's 40% Cornish stone, and those are they'll act in a very similar way in the glaze. They're like a glass former, they'll make a sort of beautiful shiny glaze, and then I use 40% of plant ash. So in those instances, I might say, for example, I could maybe take the plant ash down to maybe 30% and add a ball clay, you know, at 10% or something, you know. So it's like, it's quite a good idea to keep the kind of glass forming aspects, you know, quite similar, and then you can kind of like play around with the other parts of it. So you could take the Cornish stone down, maybe like to 30%, and then you could add on like a china clay at 10% or something, you know, just see how that goes and like see what kind of effect it has on the glaze. So yeah, if you're interested actually in learning more about like eco-conscious pottery glazing, I actually went through all of these experiments, just switching the ingredients slightly, and then created a kind of a whole bunch of like eco-conscious glazes, basically, in the book Eco-Conscious Pottery Glazing, which you can get from the Oxford Clay website or from Amazon as well. And it just basically has all of these like loads of recipes in there. So a lot of them I actually made using this technique where I just tweaked certain ingredients and then just saw how it would affect the colour and the texture. And it was super interesting because some of them, you know, were very, very shiny. For example, I had a very shiny glaze, which was like 50% Cornwall stone, 25% quartz, 15% whiting, 10% dolomite. That came out like almost like glass. So I'm just holding up the book. It's like, it's hard to show you on the camera, but it's basically like glass, like a very, very, very shiny glaze. Whereas other ones were like more like matte, so you know, using very sort of similar ingredients. But yeah, if you want some sort of tried and tested base recipes, that book is like a really good resource. It's got 17 recipes in there for you to try, and yeah, they use kind of like eco-conscious ingredients, so it's kind of like, you know, all the materials are kind of like sourced from regions where there is like high regulation around mining, you know, workers' rights, environmental protection, and the other ingredients are basically water and plant ash, which you can make yourself. So yeah, those are the ingredients. Right, okay, so that's the first thing to say, is that you can make a totally unique pottery glaze by just tweaking your recipe, your base recipe slightly. Okay, the next way of making a totally unique pottery glaze is to change the levels of metal oxides that you're adding to your glaze to colour it. Okay, so this is really how many potters will create their unique pottery glaze. This is what they will be tweaking when they're kind of making different kind of glazes. They're taking a base recipe and they're just adding different kind of oxides, maybe at like 1%, maybe like 2%, maybe like a mixture of like a combination of different like oxides. Maybe they're adding a rutile and then they want, you know, and then they're adding, which kind of creates a kind of beautiful mottled effect. And then they're also, you know, adding maybe like a verdigris or, you know, whatever, like in terms of like the different oxides. That's how they're making their unique pottery glaze. So so I make my totally unique pottery glaze. Recently I've done some yeah, just to say, I have a base recipe which is Cornish stone, plant ash and quartz, and then I paint verdigris on, which I make myself, and that makes my kind of totally unique pottery combination glaze. But recently I've been experimenting with actually adding verdigris at 5% and 10% to different base glazes and just seeing how that looks. And so that is one way that I found that, you know, in terms of like trying to make different greens, you can also use, you know, so you can use recycled metals, you could use, you know, verdigris that you make yourself from copper. You can also use iron oxide that you get from like rust. That's another thing that I have been experimenting with as well. And if you're interested to know more about that, there's some resources on the Oxford Clay website for you. Yeah, Eco-Conscious Pottery Glazing has a good example of using recycled metals to make colour. So yeah, so that's the second way that potters will create a unique glaze. They'll have unique combinations of metal oxides, colorants, and different percentages, and they will just, yeah, measure those out. If you're making like glaze tests, it's just to say it's a really good idea to have like kind of sensitive kitchen scales. Like I've got kitchen scales that go down to like 0.5 grams, and that really helped me when I was making the verdigris test actually, because you know, you just want to be very precise with oxides because they can tend to be like very strong. Some of them are very strong, so it's really good to be able to measure in like really tiny amounts. Yeah, that's the top tip for that number 2 section on making your own unique pottery glaze. So okay, so the third way of making a totally unique pottery glaze is to use plant ashes in your recipe. Okay, so basically this is based on the fact that different plants make Different plants have a completely unique mineral and trace metal makeup in their tissues, depending on where they've grown, depending on the environmental conditions that they've grown in, like the kind of weather, depending on their species, depending on the age of the plant, depending on how much pollution they've been exposed to. They have a completely different mineral and trace metal makeup in their tissues. And when you burn that plant, into an ash and then you mix it into a glaze, it can create like amazing color effects. Okay, so generally speaking, the colors you can create with plant ash glazing are less strong than oxides. So you're not going to get like a big, brilliant blue or a brilliant green or, anything like that, but you will get like these subtle, like amazing earthy colors, little speckles of natural minerals. I absolutely love it. I love the kind of unknown aspect as well of like making plant ash glazes, because you just never really know how it's going to turn out. Different plants are different, I guess that could be like a downside as well, but it's also just so interesting, like I've been testing loads of different plants. I've done a whole book on this actually, plant ash glazing, if you're interested in like, looking at the different glazes and what they look like and stuff. So I found like different leaves make, like waxy leaves, for example, often make a beautiful kind of whitey, creamy, bluey glaze. I found like cherry laurel leaves make a sort of pink, purpley pink glaze with like brown speckles. I found black beans, which I've grown myself and shelled to eat the beans. The shells of those beans make this really amazing glaze, which is very, very speckledy. It's like this kind of lovely, clear, transparent glaze with like loads of speckles. It's just amazing, that one. So each plant will make a totally unique pottery glaze. So if you're interested in kind of looking, sort of thinking like developing a unique style for your pottery, plant ash glazing could be a really good way of doing it. It's just that you need to be able to get enough of that plant to make, to make your glaze like consistently, which can be, when I've read books on kind of ash glazing, that's been the thing which people have sort of noted. There's been people saying, oh, this can be quite tricky because it's quite tricky to get enough plant. You got to make sure you get enough plant, but that's, I mean, if you're collecting recycled ashes as well from like a kind of, that's how I make my glaze. Actually, I collect recycled ashes from people like using wood burning stoves to heat their homes, and then so generally speaking, they're burning different types of wood, but generally speaking, they're burning like a hardwood to heat their homes. Then I know it's kind of probably going to be hardwood, and it's probably going to make a sort of transparent glaze, hopefully, with sometimes you get like little speckles of blue and you get little speckles of brown as well. So that's the only downside. It can be quite hard to control, but it just can create like such unique effects in your pottery, such unique glazes. It's a really exciting area of glazing. Right, okay, so those are the 3 ways. Let's just have a little recap of those 3 ways. So the first one is that, 3 ways to make a totally unique pottery glaze. The first one is to get a base recipe and then tweak it slightly with maybe a ball clay or something that adds a little bit of colour, or something that's going to change maybe the texture of it, maybe like a dolomite. Just tweak those little things, maybe split a 10% up into 5% and add 5% plant ash or something. You can just tweak that recipe to get a really unique look to your pottery. The next way is to add different like colouring oxides. You can add recycled metal oxides, you can add rust or something, like recycled iron oxide, recycled copper oxide, verdigris. You can have different combinations of different colouring oxides, and you can make a completely unique pottery glaze by doing that. So that is, I would say, the most popular way, but have a good base glaze recipe. If you want a nice shiny glaze recipe, then you add your colouring oxides like on top of that recipe. Okay, number 3 is that you can use plant ashes in your glaze to make a totally unique glaze. So this is my favorite one. It's like really, yeah, my favorite tip for making a unique glaze. It can be unpredictable. But it's really exciting. You just never really know like how it's going to turn out. Different plants. Make completely unique glazes, and it's so much fun, honestly. So so those are the 3 ways of making a totally unique pottery glaze, and it's been so nice to share those with you. And happy potting, happy, if you want to make a glaze. There's I meant to say this at the beginning. I think I've got a beginner's guide to glaze making with a recipe in there. It's like a booklet. You can download it for free, totally for free, on the Oxford Clay website in the resources for potters. So oxfordclay.co.uk/resources for potters. It's totally free, and you can see just how easy it is to make your own glaze. It's basically a bit like making a cake. Just get ingredients, mix them together, a bit of water, properly mix it, which I always do. Not make sure you mix it properly, and then you've made a glaze. So very exciting. So it's a stoneware glaze recipe in that booklet. Just for you there if you wanna try a bit of glaze making. So until the next episode, I'm wishing you very, very happy potting, and I'll see you soon. Really looking forward to seeing you on the next episode. Goodbye. Thank you so much for joining me for the Oxford Clay Pottery podcast. If you're interested in learning more about Oxford Clay or eco-conscious pottery, there's so much for you on the Oxford Clay website. There's books, e-courses, there's a blog on there, loads of other podcast episodes, and I can't wait to share it with you. The web address is oxfordclay.co.uk. I'll see you over there.